Hello, good evening, good morning to everyone, or good day. I know that there are people joining from very different countries, and we have speakers from very different countries, so very welcome to everyone who joined. Thanks for your time joining. This is going to be a really exciting webinar, and before we start, we'll take a couple of minutes to go through some technical stuff and allow time for people to join and register. So this is a webinar, so you may encounter some technical problems with the connection. Probably you know that already because you participated, and so speakers might also encounter some issues. So if this happens, please just reconnect again. If this happens to speakers, we will take a short break and reconnect the speakers. So this is, I guess, something that's becoming a business as usual already to participate in webinars in all of the quarantine situation now. The second thing, we'll have speakers speaking one by one for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions for each speaker. You may ask the questions in the question field in your screen. We will be able to look at the questions. Of course, since the questions may be many, or we hope there will be many, so we apologize, we won't be able to answer all of the questions, but we'll try to select the questions that will seem to us the most interesting or the most well, frankly, easiest to answer. Two will be a criteria. Then we will have some interactivity, so I encourage you to participate. We will have questions to you all, and for that you will have to join another platform, which I will show in a minute. We are not sharing the slides, so you will see the slides now on the screen, and you will be able to access the recording of this webinar at your leisure, but we did not agree with the speakers to send around the slides, so we are not able to promise that. Yeah, so I think we can start. It's really exciting, and I'm really happy that we are able to do this with this wonderful group of people. These are people from different countries and different industries, and of course, in the current COVID situation, for all of us, it's really interesting to hear what about the situation in those industries and in those different countries. We will have an exciting time. The thing that is connecting all of us, myself to the speakers, is that we were classmates in a wonderful class in the Yesa Business School. So it's also a great memory because we did some work on video together before. And I hope, or I'm sure, this is going to be exciting. So as promised, please go to menti.com and enter the code. If you please write it down right now. I'll make a photo right now because I'll have to change the slides. We will have 2 questions for you, and you will have the whole duration of the webinar to answer, and then we will come back to the questions or to the answers at the end of the webinar. And the questions are, of course, the ones that have been asked, all over and over. But it's interesting to see how this group of people who joined now feels about it and what is their business situation. So first, how will your sales be affected? What is your projection? So no effect. Hopefully, many of you are here, but I know that it's a bit too optimistic. Then up to 10% decrease, 10 to 30% decrease, or more than 30% decrease. So please choose one of those. And the second question is, when do you think we will be back to a pre-COVID-19 level of sales? So when are we going to be rebounding in our business? So we'll talk about how economy is going to do. But this is a question about your specific business, so we can analyze that a little bit together. So, without further ado, I would like now to invite Julien Manceaux. Julien is a senior economist at ING Bank. ING is one of the biggest banks in Europe, as we all know. And Julien has been working for more than 10 years in the economics department of the ING Bank, and has been doing economic reviews and projections for the bank and for the bank's clients. And we are really lucky that Julien will be able to share with us today his insights into the situation and its fallout. Julien, the floor is yours. Julien, if you are speaking, you may be muted.
Yep,
sorry for
I think now you hear me.
Now you're on. Now you're on.
And you see the slides as well, so perfect. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, you know, in economics, we love animals. So in this first cartoon, you can see 3 animals, 2 of which you probably know. So we all love bull markets when everything is going up. We all hate bear markets where everything's going down. And what is happening right now is neither one nor the other, but what we call in economics a black swan. A black swan basically is an event that is very disruptive and could not be forecasted or expected. And as a very disruptive event, it's very hard to predict where it will go. So in terms of economic outlook, you probably noticed that they are all over the place on the internet. So you have growth forecasts that are changing every day. Forecasting is part of my job, and I can tell you in my team, it's changing every week, more or less. So the aim here is not to give you a forecast that will be outdated in 1 week or so, but to try to take the lenses of the business. Simply because for a CEO that GDP will go down by 4 or 6% this year, probably boils down to the same question, which is, okay, how do I survive this? So what I will do is take some parts of a company or a business income statement and have a look at what are the economics behind those elements right now. And the first one, of course, there was a question from Vilius on that, is earnings. So on the revenue side of your income statement, obviously there are some impacts depending on the sector where you are. So behind that is the shock on GDP growth. It's still very hard to have a final figure on that, simply because it depends on the number of weeks that we will remain in lockdown. Some basic mathematics behind that is just to remember that, okay, 1 year is 100% of GDP. In 1 year, you have 52 weeks. So every week is worth around 2% of GDP. And right now, in developed economies, we have been losing 30 to 40% of activity. So basically, every week that goes in lockdown, we lose around 0.7 percentage point of GDP. And we have to measure that this only happens during wars, so never in peacetime. When you look here at the long-term theory from the IMF, you see that the worst thing that ever happened to world economic growth was in 2009, and that was plus 0.1. Here, the last forecast that was out yesterday morning is -3 for this year, with -6% in the US and -7.5% in the Eurozone. So depending on which part of the world you are, well, you can be it differently. We can see that some countries or some zones that are less affected by the virus are in fact affected by the slowdown in the other zone, or the slump in commodity prices that we've been witnessing. um, so how long will this last? So how many weeks will we remain in lockdown? Well, okay, this is not, of course, a very scientific graph, but when you look the number of new COVID cases in China, which is the gray line, and that you put with the correct lags, the situation of other countries, where you can say that, okay, before early May, it will be very difficult to exit fully the lockdown mode. So some economic activity will continue to be affected, probably until after the summer. And it depends on which sector you are looking at. So a very clear survey, one of the best I've seen until now, was from the French official statistic agency, which measured, okay, between the different sectors, how activity was affected. And actually, it really depends on where you are. So if you are in the building sector, yeah, probably your activity is down by 90% in developed countries. While if you are in agro-food, for example, we will have some words about that with Nikolas just after me. Well, the situation is probably a bit better. And in the industry, there also it depends. If you are in the pharmaceutical industry, where you are probably doing much better than if you are in the automobile industry, where there is almost no activity right now. So we have a shock that has been fairly symmetric in terms of countries and geographical zones, but quite asymmetric in terms of sectors. Um, so that's for the, of course, for the revenue side, the fact that, okay, for most businesses, sales and earnings are tremendously affected depending on which sector you are. Now, the current crisis is also affecting your costs, and there are, of course, things that you can do to try to lower your fixed costs, because the lack of sales is getting into cash problems. So what we see throughout developed countries is that people are putting away workers. So you can either do that by putting them on unemployment, like is the case for the moment in the US. So you saw that in the last 2 weeks, we have several millions of unemployment claims, so new unemployment claims per week. As you see in this graph, at the worst time of the financial crisis in 2009, we were at 900,000 per week. And we are now talking about more than 6 million per week. So the sheer size of the shock on unemployment is very large. But you have actually the same type of thing happening in Europe, where there are temporary unemployment schemes that allow companies to actually, well, keep their workers, but they are for the moment being paid largely by the state. So clearly, if you can benefit from this kind of schemes, well, it's a way to limit your fixed costs for the moment. Same for inventories. We have been seeing lots of companies trying to compensate the lack of physical sales by going online. But when looking at which types of goods are actually increasing in terms of sales, well, it's not good for all sectors. Huh? So for the moment, it's basically very good for supermarkets and more generally for food and healthcare, for example. But for the rest of the sectors, we cannot say that e-commerce is really compensating for the lack of sales. But of course, if you can go you can go online to try to sell what's left in your inventories. Energy costs, that's also an important one, especially if you are in the industry. When you look here at oil prices, which are here in dollars in orange, and you can read them on the right hand side axis, which is inverted. So we are now around $30 a barrel, and you see that the blue line indicates that the surplus production for the moment is huge. Given the OPEC agreement we have had in recent days, the surplus production will probably go down, but it will remain positive. That's clear. And for the moment, we don't really expect prices at the end of the year above the $45. Now, this has, of course, a tremendous impact on the US shale gas industry, and it cannot be excluded that on the long term, production will be lower in the US. Okay, which means that maybe in terms of cost, if you can do something now to cover yourself up against future increases of prices, so talking about 2022, for example, well, maybe maybe it's a good idea if energy costs are a big part of your fixed costs. Now, a big cost item is, of course, also taxes, and what most governments, at least in developed economies, are doing are tax rebates, tax rescheduling. That, of course, if you can access this type of scheme, it's a good idea to use them. Actually, most measures, wherever you are looking at, so China, Western Europe, the US, most measures are actually financial measures. So to help companies to access credit in an easier way. And why they are doing that? Well, it's most of all to avoid that the liquidity crisis that most companies are facing, because there are no earnings anymore and lots of fixed costs, turns into a solvency crisis, which is a crisis where companies cannot actually continue to service their debt, which could turn into a financial crisis in the like what we had in 2008, 2009. So it's very important to avoid that, and that's what most governments and central banks are doing now. So maybe a quick explanation on how this works. So you have corporates on one side and central banks on the other. Corporates can finance themselves on financial markets by issuing commercial paper. And what central banks are doing is directly buying them. So the Federal Reserve is doing that a lot. The European Central Bank has also a program to buy directly bonds that corporates are issuing. Now, in Western Europe, corporates are financing themselves much more through banks. But of course, it's difficult to find financing in periods of stress. So there, the central banks and the ECB in particular has intervened quite strongly to put almost unlimited quantities of liquidity at the disposal of banks at an interest rate that is now around minus 75 basis points, meaning that banks can quite easily deliver credits as they want. But of course, for that, they need some guarantees, and most let's say Western governments have been providing those types of guarantees. So it's the case in the US, the case in most European countries. So as a company, you can ask for credit guarantees from the government. If your government doesn't do it, you can ask the European Investment Bank to do it. To get short-term banking credit. For your bank, it's relatively easy to deliver it to you if it's guaranteed, because it has access to almost unlimited financing by the central bank, be it in the US or in Europe. So it's working, but not as much as hoped. So when you look here at the risk premium that companies are paying So on 5 years interest rates, and here it's for triple B companies. In blue, you have the rate in the US, and in orange in the Eurozone. Well, you see that there has been a huge amount of stress with risk premium increasing by more than 300 basis points. And okay, it has come down thanks to the central bank actions, but not as much as where they were just before. So there are still clearly some stress on the financing side. Of course, central banks are also buying a lot of bonds issued by governments to maintain long-term interest rates very low. So this is the case here in the graph for the US 10-year and for the bond yield in Germany, that will probably remain negative for the next 2 years. So risk-free long-term financing will clearly remain low. So in terms of financing this cash gap that you as a business can encounter, there are currently lots of solutions, but of course, time is not on your side as a business, so you have to act quick. So what can we expect for what comes next after all that? Well, it will clearly be a world with even more depth than what we had before. So you see here. So in orange, the debt to GDP ratio of the United States. So we were approaching the 120%. We will probably end up above the 135 after this crisis. In the Eurozone, here in blue, you had a downward trend clearly, but this will go up again, and we will end up this crisis well above the 100%, with some big countries in the Eurozone staying there probably for a long period, so like France, Italy, and Spain getting closer to the 100. You also have here in gray, and perhaps more interestingly, the debt to GDP ratio of US companies. So who are also very much indebted and will end up also more indebted from this crisis, which of course puts the question for the aftermath. Okay, how will we be able to deleverage all that? So probably coming back to a world where private debts will have to be in a way taken back by the states. At which conditions we still don't know. And for the state, the government debt, probably a new period of austerity coming down to us. So the aftermath will be difficult from that point of view. Clearly, for the US and all those active in US dollar, maybe it's also time to cover yourself, because on the long term, the strength of the US dollar is depending on the imbalances of the US, and the more debt and the more current account deficits the US is taking on, well, the weaker the dollar in the longer run. So maybe if you are active in foreign currencies, it's good to cover yourself for what happens at the end of 2021. A third thing that we can tell probably about the future is a world with possibly more inflation, which means higher costs for your companies. There are reasons to think that inflation could be back. There are also elements against, of course, like aging and the fact that e-commerce will probably continue to surge after this episode. But clearly, we know that the large stimulus that is in place right now will be partly monetized by central banks, which is normally inflationary. And we know that highly indebted government also benefit from higher inflation periods. So there could be an interest to have higher inflation. In terms of costs, the fact that most companies could reshore some supply chains simply because government seems to want more independence on the supply of some goods. Most of the forecasts right now are also forecasting lower world trade levels for coming years. But of course, when you do more things closer to your home, generally, especially in Western economies, it increases costs. This crisis also clearly pleads for higher inventories on average in the future, which also implies more costs. And of course, even if interest rates remain very low, well, more debt means also more cost of debt in the future. So all this could lead to higher inflation. So to conclude, maybe in a few sentences, so clearly it's an historic shock. So the sheer scale of the figures were unthinkable a few weeks ago. Countries are hit in an almost symmetric way. We can of course discuss that, but for sectors, clearly it's very asymmetric. The worst should be over by the end of May. But clearly, only a gradual activity take-up is expected, and financing costs will remain under pressure right now. Clearly, despite the heavy central bank intervention. So, some things you can do. Well, be innovative when you create revenues. Maybe going online can be a solution. Of course, get ready to restart your business with the right prevention measures when you can. Cover yourself for some of the stuff we have discussed, and benefit from all the government levies that is at your disposal. So especially in Europe, even if the governments your own government is not doing something well, there are lots to take from the European Commission plans and the European Investment Bank. And when you take credit, well, please ensure that those credits are guaranteed by the state or the EIB. It will be much easier to get something from your bank. So thank you for your attention. I think, Vilius, I can give the floor back to you, and don't hesitate if you have questions. Of course, we are there for that.
Thank you very much, Julien. This was really very exciting, and well, I must say I'm trying to follow many of the economics forecasts and analysis, and really this was one of the best that I heard. So really, thank you so much. By the way, for the viewers, Julien is joining us from Brussels, and I'm mentioning it because we have people joining from all over the world. So I think I need to mention the locations also. I'm conscious a bit of time, and I know that, and I can see that there are not many questions now on the platform. So maybe I will move immediately to our next speaker, to Nikolas, and then I'm sure we'll have questions for Julien in the discussion, for which the last half hour should be devoted. So the next speaker is Nikolas Oetker. Nikolas is joining us from Barcelona. Nikolas is executive head of marketing at Dr. Oetker Spain and Portugal. And we all know Dr. Oetker. We all use the products of Dr. Oetker, and we appreciate them even more now in the quarantine. I guess I'm speaking not only for myself, because these are your safe way to making sure you get your needs covered. But Dr. Oetker is one of the biggest family-owned businesses in Germany and in Europe. They have the yearly sales revenue of about 7.1 billion euro, and they've been active in the market for 125 years. So Nikolas agreed to share with us his insights into how it looks from the food industry perspective, and I guess also from Spain and Portugal perspective. So Nikolas, the floor is yours.
Vilius, perfect. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and the free advertising. It's true that frozen pizza and cakes is a great solution to easy solution for a moment of happiness in these difficult times. So I don't have any slides to share. I will just focus on a few points that we've encountered as a group, and then specifically in our food business during these last couple of months, and also talk a little bit about what we're doing to start thinking about after COVID. And I think much of it ties into what Julien very kindly shared before. So feel free to add questions anytime, or obviously also those of you on the call to interrupt if you feel the need. So what I'll be talking about is, just for context, is essentially a diversified group that focuses most of its business on food and beverage. And it's been interesting to see that we've had very different impacts on our business during this time. So the food business, what we were talking about earlier, for example, frozen pizza and cakes, these are products that in these kind of moments, we saw this in the financial crisis a few years ago, and we're seeing it again now. These are products that people turn to for small moments of pleasure, and so perversely, while unfortunately a lot of people are suffering, our sales are actually up quite considerably. And we spend most of our time now trying to make sure that our supply chain stays up and running. So Julien shared the asymmetries of the impact on the demand and supply side. And for us, the demand is clearly up and supply is challenging. So we've had to focus, for example, our production on fewer flavors of products in order to make sure that we keep up with demand. E-commerce is another thing that Julien mentioned. We've seen a big increase in orders from our retailers through whom we sell our products, our food products, and there the problem is capacity. Many of the retailers aren't prepared to deal with huge sudden increases in sales. But then we have another part of our business which is beverage. We're in the beer, sparkling wine and spirits business, also waters. And a big part of that business is what we call out of home, which is the restaurants, hotels, bars, cafes, and so on. And of course, many of those businesses have gone to demand zero. And therefore, we have this strange situation where on the one hand, we need more people helping out in our factories to make sure that we produce, or at least do more shifts so that we can produce what we need. And on the other hand, other factories, our breweries, for example, who've seen demand decrease so drastically that some of those colleagues are on flexible labor schedules at the moment, or on a holiday for the time being, and we're trying to make sure that obviously they can come back as quickly as possible once we get back online. That's part of thinking about what will happen after the crisis. And there in Germany, especially where a lot of our production is, we have again the experience of the financial crisis, where I think Germany was able to rebound relatively quickly, both in the big automotive industry and also us in food, precisely because we did not fire employees, but rather or let them go throughout this period, but rather found more flexible ways of reducing hours, holidays, etc., so that they could come back online quickly afterwards. Very quickly, some of the learnings that we've seen, and again, I mean, my responsibility is for marketing in Spain and Portugal, so this is my vision on the global group. Obviously, is slightly limited, but in general, one of the things we've learned is that preparation for these moments is key. You talked about the black swan earlier, Julien, and it feels like maybe we think of that as something that comes around only every 100 years, but the truth is that we should probably prepare ourselves for more regular shocks of some kind or another. And there's a great saying by Warren Buffett who says, "It's only when the tide goes out that you see who's been swimming naked." And I think this unfortunately applies both to businesses and to individuals. If you don't have a buffer in your cash and liquidity planning, in your cash management, if you're not prepared to adjust your supply chain, if you're so optimized in everything, if you're so hyper efficient in all your processes that you can't make adjustments when the context changes, you can find yourself in real trouble. And conversely, if you plan for those shocks and make yourself as resilient to them as possible, you might even be able to benefit. And that's also something that over our long history we've learned, that by being a diversified group, by maintaining some slack in our production and supply chain systems, in moments when others have suffered, we've conversely sometimes been in a good position to, for example, to make acquisitions under preferable conditions, or investments in our business, or keep investing in our advertising, which we are very much doing at the moment to help reassure our consumers that we're there with them, sharing this time with them, and helping them out with the products, even if that's only a small help for many. So that's a little bit of what we've noticed during the process. And since this is very much a discussion about what happens afterwards, Julien mentioned some very good points, and I would concur with those. So trying just to build on that without being too repetitive. Obviously, the managing cash for after COVID is key. So to make sure that we're ready to reinvest when this goes when we go back to normal. We think that demand for our products will actually fall. For a lot of our products will actually fall after COVID is over, because people will not want to consume products at home as much, or they will consume less of them. We don't think that people will start going streaming back into bars and restaurants either, for safety reasons, but also for liquidity reasons, personal liquidity reasons. And so we're planning for sort of a slower recovery. There is a question about also ways of working. What have we learned in this crisis? Every crisis is an opportunity in some way, right? And what have we learned in this crisis that maybe we would like to keep? And I think certainly there are ways of working, and agile, including flexible working hours, flexible locations, working more online as we're doing now, that I think we will maintain. And I think we will travel less. And I think we found that actually doing lots of international coordination meetings does not require us to be in a plane and then sit down face to face. And that's a good thing for many reasons. It's good for the environment, and it's good for time saving. But we've also noticed that there's some things that are really hard to replicate when you're not face to face. For brainstorming, for example, for very emotionally driven conversations, for performance reviews. I just did my performance reviews with my team, and it's really different if you can't look people in the eye face to face, and the nonverbal communication doesn't travel as well over camera. So I think that's something that we've noticed, and we will probably try to recover those things in person. And then the other thing about going back, and I'll finish with this, so to give time to the other speakers, is that we will. It's really figuring out how to get back online requires you to really sit together as a team and do it, and actually think about the new architecture of the business afterwards, and what will the consumer decisions be? How will they behave? How do you want to respond to those? Are there opportunities? For example, we're so focused on crisis management that I think we forget that actually we need to start thinking already about the at the same time as we still have some countries that have not been hit yet, but we know they will be. We have to start thinking about what will happen after in some other countries. And we started doing that both here locally and I think globally as well. And just to finish, I think this is the opportunity, the real opportunity we've seen as a business, is that culturally, this is a moment when we see the wonderful culture that we've built over many, many years comes through very, very strongly in the extent to which people help each other, in the understanding for the different situations that different employees are in. Some who have less work are getting paid less salary, some who are having to put in extraordinary hours and effort under conditions of real difficulty, when we've really seen everybody come together. And that's something that's incredibly strong, and that is a non-tangible that we don't find in any balance sheet, in any cash or liquidity planning, but that is very much related to success. So I think we're very happy to have seen that, and that's something we'll be focusing on afterwards. And with that, I give back to you, Vilius, and perhaps we'll hear from some of our other friends.
Nikolas, thank you very much. This was really exciting. Maybe before moving to the next speaker, maybe just one question from my side. You are in Spain, and you are responsible for Spain and Portugal. And Spain has been one of the hardest affected countries. So how do you see the recovery? Of course, there's a lot of talk that it may not go back to the kind of pre-COVID may not ever happen. The life will change. But when do you think your demand will be comparable to the pre-COVID situation?
So the timeline that we're the most likely scenario, we've built three scenarios: a sort of a very positive one, a maybe more realistic one, and a worst case scenario to prepare ourselves. And the more realistic one that we see assumes that the restrictions on movement will be loosened somewhere close to July. Perhaps in the meantime, between now and July, there will be partial loosening of those restrictions, so that some people can go back to work. Some non-essential sectors of the industries of the economy can go back to work. But until really people get back to normal, where they feel comfortable to go out and mingle again, and so on and so forth, we think maybe July or August. And we then think that we will not see an immediate recovery, because a lot of people have been very strongly hit, and their finances have been very strongly hit. And I think we think they will be careful in how they spend. Now, for our products that are not as expensive as I don't know, for the car industry, that bounce back will be slightly quicker, perhaps. But it may take some time. And keep in mind that the Spanish economy is to some considerable extent dependent on tourism. This is a country with 47 million people, where 75 million come each year to visit and spend money here throughout the summer months, especially. And that at the moment isn't looking so likely. So we think it'll be a slow. It won't be a tight, a strong V shape. It won't be an L either. It might be more close to a U shape. And hopefully by September, October, we'll be back online, and people will be back in school, and then normality will resume.
Thank you, Nikolas. So now it's time to move across the Atlantic. And we have Jorge Tamariz joining us from Sao Paulo. Jorge is the Chief Financial Officer of Belarina Alimentos. And Belarina is an affiliate of Seedboard Corporation. And they are, Jorge is in the food business also, but in production side. And as many of us know, Seedboard is a 100-year-old public American corporation, and has a turnover of $6.8 billion US dollars. So Jorge, the floor is yours now, and I will put on your slides. Please give me a nod when they are on.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vilius, for the introduction. Well, I wanted to talk about more. I'm the only one in this region in the call right now, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the region as a whole, and then talk about what's going on in Brazil, the reality that we have faced and that we have actually reacted upon, and some incentives that the market is actually forming into, some incentives that the companies, that the private sector is actually adopting, so that this crisis can be overcome in a better way. So it's funny, but I'm Ecuadorian living in Brazil. So I don't know if you have been aware of, but Ecuador is one of the country per capita that has the most number of cases in the region. It has been spiking a lot, and Brazil, of course, is the largest number, due to its size, but also focused in Sao Paulo state. So it's quite interesting to be in the middle of this crisis in a region that has proven throughout history to be one of the most volatile in the world. So Vilius, if we can go to the next slide, just to jump into some quick numbers about LATAM and the volatility of the market. So in the past 5 years, Latin American countries have not been performing up to speed. So while we were seeing in other regions higher growth, high improvement of infra or healthcare systems, in Latin America, that's been the opposite. And as you can see in the graph in the right, we have been actually growing in 2019 in a medium of about 1.7% versus the growth that you saw worldwide from Julien's presentation. And this has been driven because the region is largely positively correlated to what's going on in the rest of the world. What this means is that when a crisis hit in Europe or a crisis hits in the US, the volatility, the trend that we see in Latin America is larger than that. So it's, in other words, if the crisis is going to be hitting the US or Europe, it's going to be hitting harder Latin America. And it's going to be hitting harder Latin America because of three main reasons, I would say. First, the weak external demand. The majority of the countries in the region are exporters. And we export mainly to Asia, to China, to the US, and to Europe. The moment that you have this issue, the moment that you're entering into this crisis, and these other regions are having problems with demand, with consumption, then you're getting hit harder here in Latin America. As Julien was saying, the other one is oil prices and commodities in general. Oil prices have been dropped this year, dropped dramatically to the lowest points in the last 25 years. And we are seeing this influencing directly the capacity of the local governments to actually take measurements and support the economy, as you have seen in the US, as you have seen in Europe. And finally, of course, is the economic disruption that this crisis is creating. So emerging markets, at the end of the day, what we don't have is fiscal capacity to respond to this disruption. We don't have the adequate healthcare systems. We are having issues with social distancing. Why? Because of the concentration of population in different regions of countries and the continent, and more than that, the issue of poverty within these concentration regions. So, for example, talking about Brazil, Sao Paulo has more than 2.8 million people that live in these so-called favelas or poor neighborhoods, out of which 50% don't have access to water. So for you to have an idea of how this crisis can affect these regions, if you don't have access to water, you cannot improve your hygiene measurements. If you cannot improve your hygiene measurements, you are actually creating a path for the virus to spread. And finally, we don't have access to the same number of tests of infra that it's to handle this type of infection. Hospitals are trying to be built. I think that one of the countries that began with this effort in a really, really, really productive way was Peru. They were the first ones to actually enter and begin building emergency hospitals for COVID patients. So we have been dealing with that type of initiatives, but as a region, as a whole, we are facing this downturn, and the downturn will be even worse for us in the future after this crisis is over, because of the pace that the economy will be recovering. So that's something that it's critical right now, and it's tied to the volatility of what the region and the characteristics of the region overall. Vilius, if we can go to the next one. So here, what we're seeing, and this is not only Brazil, but in the majority of countries in Latin America, it's damn if you do, damn if you don't approach. This is mainly related to the cultural mindset of the people here, but politics are entering into play and are entering really, really strong. So you have state governments fighting against federal governments. You have people asking for measurements, the government taking measurements, people complaining about those measurements. So it's a matter of a limbo of what to do or what not to do. Here in Brazil, I think that it's worldwide known. What you've seen is that the president, Bolsonaro, is fighting directly with his health minister, which is fighting back with the president. Most likely that this health minister is going to be out by the end of this week. Then you have the state government of Sao Paulo. The governor is fighting against the president, taking measurements that are against what the president is directing. The president saying that we're going to be entering or taking measurements that are against what the World Health Organization is actually promoting. So you have a lot of controversial arguments that are going into a political sphere instead of focusing on the economic and the health sphere that it's what's going and driving the crisis right now. And what we can see here in the graph, and this is something that is striking and aligned with what Julien was saying, we are in the need actually that the governments, that the local governments are actually assuming a more protagonic role during this crisis. And to do so, you have to have fiscal stimulus so that the economy can actually maintain its pace. And again, here in this graph, you can see that one of the leader in the region is Peru. And Peru has been doing this back to what Nico was saying just a couple of minutes ago, preparing themselves for a crisis, building up on reserves, building up on international funds, bringing international investors, promoting economic measurements that actually, in this type of scenarios, is granting them a really, really, really important benefit and advantage over the rest of the economies in the region. You can see, for example, in this case, too, Mexico. Mexico, right now, due to the current government, they're spending less than 1% of their GDP in fiscal stimulus. What's going on with that? What are going to be the repercussions with that? The companies are not going to be able to access cheaper sources of funding, and without that, they're not going to be able to sustain their operations. So it becomes again a play of cash, a play of how you're managing this credit risk that you're going to be exposing. So with this small introduction of the region and jumping more into Brazil, what we can see in Brazil, and Vilius, you can go to next slide, is that the country was hit from all sides during this crisis. So the stock exchange and the currency meltdown. So we lost in the stock exchange in reais, in the local currency, 30% within these 4 months of 2020. And the currency depreciated, again, 30% more versus US dollar. So we went from 370, 380 of real versus dollar to 520 nowadays. So that's, of course, creating a lot of stress in the country. Revisiting these projections, as Julien said yesterday, the World Bank issued their April summary, and they revisited for all the regions in the continent. They have revisited the projections of 2020 forecasts. What we see right now is Brazil, that was supposed a couple of months ago to have a healthy growth above 2% this year, to having a contraction of 5% for 2020. And this related to the virus and related to the uncertainty that we have. In a short window of time between March and April, more than 600,000 companies have been closed down. And these, particularly micro and small companies, have been closed down. And of course, this related to unemployment. More than 9 million people have lost their jobs over this period of time. So we're seeing a lot of issues in maintaining services, in maintaining companies, in maintaining different industries running. I think that, I don't know if you're aware of, but for example, in Brazil, you have automakers are really concentrated. You have Volkswagen, you have Ford, you have the major Fiat, the major car producers here, and they literally stop the business. So what we're seeing here, that is that companies, to maintain and to support their obligations, they have to take on measurements that are going to be counterproductive for the economy. And what we're seeing is, in complement to these issues with the private sector, is that we're also seeing that the healthcare system is already beginning to collapse. Different to what Nico was saying, that they're expecting to have a peak or to go back out of lockdown by June, July. Yesterday here they were announcing that the peak of coronavirus cases in Brazil may be between April and August. So you can imagine the uncertainty that rules these countries. For Brazil to actually revisit the economic projections from a central bank perspective, from a finance minister perspective, you need at least 2 weeks to actually adjust. So we have a delay of 2 weeks in that front, which complements and adds up to a delay of about 2 weeks in response to what other countries in Europe, in the US are actually pursuing. So that's quite interesting. And we have seen on the other side, and trying to be more positive about it, the government has been taking measurements not only from support to the poorest people through bonuses, through salaries to informal workers, things like that, but also from a more macro perspective. So the government, to control this devaluation of the currency, they have been buying swap contracts all over the place. So you have been entering into a lot of hedging strategies. You're seeing a lot of incentives. Interest rates are falling. They were falling already in prior to the crisis, with the objective to have a fiscal reform. Last year we have the severance reform passed by, and this year was the idea to have the fiscal reform. Of course, this is delaying the process, but the central bank was already intervening with lower interest rates so that the banks can have their spread and control the amount of money that is actually placed into the market. So you have this. And then you have another tendency that is related to the uncertainty. Here they were trying to promote a difference between vertical or horizontal isolation, talking about the lockdown. So we were talking about, for example, the horizontal one is the one that everybody's doing nowadays, that everybody's stopping to work, you're not having any type of interaction with no one, or you're not supposed to. And then the vertical isolation, that is something that is still running here as a possibility, as an opportunity, is to maintain the risk group of people at home. When you're maintaining the risk group of people at home, supposedly you are avoiding the disease to actually spread it through the market. The issue here in Brazil and the majority of countries in Latin America is that about 84.7 or 85% of elderly people live with younger relatives. So the younger relatives going back to work, catching up with Corona, taking Corona back home, and it's creating a distortion. So it's up right now to a combination. We need this fiscal stimulus, different to other regions in Latin America. We need the intervention of the government to actually support the economy, both from a public standpoint and a private standpoint. And what we have seen internally in CBOR and in Belarina is that the measurements that have been taken have been safeguarding our employees. The first objective of the company, and I think that's something really noble, is actually to avoid any type of layoffs during this process. So we are, above everything, we're maintaining the people, we're maintaining the current staff that we have. And we're focusing on specific measurements to actually promote this isolation while maintaining production, because again, we're in the food and beverage industry, and we need this process to continue its flow. We have seen a lot of, we have lost a lot of volume sold due to the crisis. As Nico was saying, people are going back to these frozen products. We sell particularly to industrial customers. So for example, if you go and buy a burger in Burger King or in McDonald's, you're gonna be consuming a bread that is produced with our flour. The issue with that is that the company that is producing that bread is seeing a demand decrease, a considerable decrease of more than 50%, because people are not going anymore and are not having the capacity to go to these restaurants, to these places, to actually have consumption of the products. So you're having a decrease in the demand, yes, but we are maintaining on the other side the delinquency in super low levels, so, which is really important from a credit standpoint. So taking that and going into the next slide, Vilius, so that we can clear this presentation. The idea is what we have seen, and I think that this is a positive thing after coronavirus and after everything that is going on, is that actually social distancing is getting us closer. As I told you, the Brazilian real right now it's in 520. Julien told you a couple of minutes ago that if you are long in dollars, you should be reevaluating because of the long-term perspective of the currency. That means that here in Brazil, assets right now are super cheap. If you are an international investor and you want to enter into the region, you're going to be buying assets that are super cheap because of this devaluation. In other words, only if you compare between June 2019 and April 2020, the assets, only because of exchange rate, you have lost 30% of the value. So you have 30% discount of the investment that you're going to be making. So this is really, really interesting. In Brazil, besides that, you have seen a boom in e-commerce. So the convenience stores, the majority of the convenience stores, the largest convenience stores have been migrating to this e-commerce perspective. So you have the largest chains are now particularly promoting and focusing in advertising to do orders of everything through the apps, through your cell phones, through their platforms. And by doing so, they are being able to maintain their chain, to maintain the production and actually maintain the economy running, which is really important. And finally, I think that is really interesting in the prior to this crisis, the majority of companies that were focusing on the last mile delivery, as global in Spain or here in Brazil and Latin America, you have Rappi, in Brazil you have iFood. These companies were struggling a lot because of the unit economics. They were spending a lot in transportation, they were spending a lot in delivery, they were spending a lot in trying to get customers within their platform. But this turn of events have been really, really positive for these companies. So what you see, for example, in one of these companies, the support employees more than tripled the number during the crisis. So they hired 3 times more the number that they were actually hiring before the crisis. The number of shoppers, people that are in the supermarkets buying for you so that you can get the delivery in your home, nearly quadruple in size. And the delivery people are actually double the size. So you can see this is really interesting. It's promoting a new wave of hiring people, a new wave, a new industry that is actually gaining now their momentum. So not everything is bad news. I think that it's a quite complicated formula, quite complicated equation. But what we have seen here is that people are beginning to act, and they're beginning to act together so that we can overcome this crisis. I'm putting in the last part of this slide, you can see over the last week, this company, Itaú, that is the largest bank in Latin America, has donated 200 million US. iFood, that is this company that I was telling you about, last mile delivery, has been able to donate more than 10.5 million US. So you have both an interaction of the government and private sectors building up new forces so that they can actually tackle this crisis in a better way. And well, finally, I wanted to end up with this picture that was quite emotional. This is the Cristo Redentor, one of Rio's more emblematic symbols. And on Sunday, they were actually giving a tribute to all the healthcare employees in the country, in the world. And they actually projected the Cristo, this emblematic figure, with wearing a doctor's tunic. So by that, I think that we're in this storm together, yes, but we are going to be in different boats to overcome the situation.
Jorge, thank you so much, and so nice that the connection worked so well over the Atlantic. So thank you. This is really useful for us to see how the perspective is a bit different, and I think we can discuss also in the discussion later on that we are in the same situation, but the perspective is a bit different. Now, conscious of the time, I will move to the next speaker, and this is Ina Anisimova. Ina is owner and managing director of PR Partner, PR agency, communications agency, sorry. And it's one of the most prominent Russian communications agencies for the last 15 years with a really impressive portfolio of clients. Ina, please, the floor is yours, and I will now put on your slides, but please start and tell me when to turn on the slides.
Yes, thank you so much, Vilius. I'm very happy to say hi to everyone. I will be happy to share my ideas, and if you have some questions, please please ask me. I will be really happy to advise something in your marketing situation. So the first is what we see right now in Russia. We see that all the companies that feel not very good in the situation with they right now meet, they try to go online. So they look for sales online in order to cover the fall in the offline sales. Especially we see such tendencies not only in events industry or marketing industry, but also in some other industries that are actually almost killed, like HoReCa and food industry, retail industry, and others. So what company actually start doing? They try to create online products if they didn't exist before from the scratch, or they try to promote their online products in order to be on the market. Also, they do marketing for online products. It means that they do more online marketing. For example, they do social media and they do YouTube channel, they do TikTok and they use many other channels in order to be online. Also, we see that some companies, in order to adopt, they go to other countries, like the Russian company Sky-Eng. This is the company that gives the lessons of the English language all across the globe. So they use the teachers, they ask the teachers all across the globe to help. So right now they try to use the moment in order to go to Spain. Some products and some companies, they become more popular because we see that actually this is the transferring of demand. They speeding the demand from the future periods. Like, for example, the demand that could exist in future for games, for books, etc. They speed up this demand and they use actually the waves of demand right now. We have in Russia so-called Ozon retail store. They are number 3 on the market, and they do like Amazon, but it's called Ozon, and they do online sales, retail sales. And what we see right now that during the first week of this COVID pandemic, they realized that users bought 2 times more gaming services. Also, they used 2 times more online cinema subscriptions. Also, they saw that the demand for games grew up also. And also people try to use goods for hobbies. Not probably here we speak about the games, so-called table games, not about the pizza. However, I think that the pizza is also a great idea to have online game or normal table game and pizza all together. So this is only the first week of pandemic. So Vilius, could you go to the second slide? Yes, here you could see on the slide, you could see some information about online cinemas. Oka, it's like Netflix, but in Russia it's quite popular as well. And Amediateka, it's also a kind of Netflix services here. So just during 1 week, the attendance increased by 30%, 1 week. And also we have alternative services like MegaGo. They also have the same, almost the same increase. And if we look, we see that people, they try to use the content more frequently, and they spend more hours not with families, but actually alone, just looking at information in the internet. Well, if you look at their surveys in China that we actually did, because PR Partner, my agency, we are a member of International Public Relations Network, we discovered the same tendencies, that the people during the first month of coronavirus epidemic, they tried to spend a lot of time at home, and they used online cinemas, online books, audio books, etc. So we see that these industries actually, they feel very well at the moment. Yes, Vilius, could you go to the next slide, please? Yes. And what does it mean that online games, social media, online entertainment, including media, they right now, actually, they feel much better. Here I put some numbers. For example, Vkontakte, it's a social media. It's like the social media net in contact. I especially put it because this is a Russian social media net, but it's a kind of a copy of Classmates, and that's why I put it here, because actually I think that you know the numbers from international players, but if you look at Vkontakte, just during the first week of April, we see that the daily number of calls increased, sent messages increased, video views increased, everything is increased. Because why? Because a lot of companies, they go online and they produce games, they produce videos, they produce audio files, webinars, etc. in order to be online and in order to try to impact on the audience right now, because they don't want to lose this audience. And actually the competition right now online is quite strong, much stronger than it were before. Well, yeah, Vilius, could you open the next? Here I would like to give some examples how people and how companies, they try to stretch their business models. And if we speak shortly, what we see right now, that everyone try to educate, because let's look at some examples in order to see how it was realized. For example, fitness centers here, fitness gyms, they try to do online lessons with the best trainers like T-Rex, yoga, other trainings. Of course, not swimming pools. However, we see right now that even the swimming pools, they do so-called dry swimming lessons. So that's quite funny. Kindergartens, because all the kindergarten schools and universities here, they are closed right now. They do online courses, and they also try to do Zoom lessons, and they try to educate parents how parents could educate their kids. For example, as a mother of 3 kids, every day I got at least 2 different plans for the school days of 2 kids in order to give them information. So it means also the schools, they do normal online trainings like normal days, but at the same time we see that the parents are more involved right now. And actually right now you could spend much more money on the online trainings for your kids than before, because you need to do it by yourself. Yes, you need to teach your kids by yourself, in fact. Also, we see that the publishing houses right now, they sell online and they do online books, audio books. And at the same time, we see a boom of freelancers who try to say to the companies that it's a good time to print your own book. If we speak about cosmetic salons, right now we see that they produce ready for home use sets. For example, ready for home use sets with shellac, with different sets for pedicure, manicure, and they do webinars. For example, one of our clients last week, they did they did online marketing for 10,000 clients, and they tried to sell them a special set for pedicure, and actually 2,000 from 10,000 they bought. So 20% of them, they actually bought the sets. So if you think that your company, for example, you are just losing the clients and you see that the demand is not high, you could think how you could go online or what you could do for your clients in order to be on the wave. If you speak about retailers, this is clear that they all start doing home delivery services. If you speak about theaters, cinemas, music bars, they do online translations, online. For example, Большой Theater here, they do online views, online screens of different performances. If you speak about event agencies, they do online celebrations. That's quite funny. For example, for the birthdays of the kids, that's super right now popular. For example, you have your best, your favorite hero of the movie, and he could entertain you during 1 or 2 hours. So this is a kind of Zoom birthday party. And if you speak about medical centers, what they do right now online diagnostic. So on the next slide, you could see that just some funny examples of the real examples of what was done. For example, here you could see a Большой Theater exhibition, also some music brand, and this is the gymnastic champion of gymnastics, Samira Mustafaeva. This is the girl who got the bronze on the championship of gymnastics, and she is doing right now trainings because she is not only a champion, let's say it like this, but she also has her own business. Okay, Vilius, could you go further? Okay, so if you speak about these winners of staying at home, I would like to give you some hints, marketing hints. So the main idea, actually marketing idea, is a kind of drug dealer rules. It means that first dose is free. It means like right now, we don't know how this coronavirus pandemic, how long it will take. Here in Russia, we speak about June. So at least during all April and all May, people are going to stay at home. So it means that you could influence on their habits, how they actually use different services and how they buy products. So that's why, you know, it's a rule that a new habit is actually being formed during 21 days. And that's why it's a good idea for a lot of companies to try to your target audience, to try to give them a small piece of information, a small piece of your service in order that they could stay with you longer. For example, right now here in Russia, it's very popular offer to sell one so-called 1-year retainer, from which you have 3 months online, and because we think that this pandemic will be here during 2-3 months at least, and then 9 months you get offline retainer. Also, a lot of companies, they do webinars and marathons for partners, for clients, because actually if your partners, if your distributors, they sell your services, you need to be with them this period. And these marathons, they could be free or paid. For example, last month, my own company, we gave 30 free consultations for small businesses. We gave them ideas what they could use to survive. By the way, if you have some questions and if you need some ideas for your business, you could write me down after the webinar, and I could give your ideas this as well, because we actually gathered all these ideas in one list, and we created a list of 150 ideas for small businesses, how to survive using online right now. So this is absolutely free. Also, we see that some companies, actually, I like what Jorge told about, and also Nico told about this idea of sense of community. Actually, some companies, they use this sense of community in their marketing. For example, we see that right now, a lot of retailers, they do special offers like buy 4 for all neighbors. By 4 they gave free home delivery and then just share, but share without any contacts. So, for example, if I have 4 neighbors, we could share. Okay, the next, please. If we speak about marketing messages, what the companies use right now in order to do their marketing, the first is safety. So we are safe, you are safe with us. For example, if they promote home delivery, they promote so-called no contacts delivery, then you could see courier. And probably you saw that KFC, they try to change their advertising. They don't use licking their fingers in advertising anymore. Right now, you can't see such advertising. However, KFC is very popular. If you speak about the advertising, they are very popular because of this particular advertising. Also, we see that, for example, Yandex is an alternative here in Russia. It's like Google. So they use also different delivery clubs in order to do no contacts delivery. The second message that a lot of companies use, we are nearby. And means that, for example, small businesses, like, for example, in my near my house, we see I have a very small cafeteria, a small cafe with a very nice owner. And what they say, what they tell to the clients, like, buy now from us, in order that we could save our business and we could save lives. And actually, I, for example, bought 10 so-called 20 cups of coffee that I'm going to use. Then all this epidemia will be closed, will be finished, and they give you a discount. So the second message is we are nearby. The third message is we care. We gave you discounts right now because you feel that's difficult times for everyone. That's why this message, we care, we think about you, we make special services for you, so we care. And the last message that a lot of companies do right now is we are here. Actually, a lot of companies, as Jorge showed us before, it doesn't matter in Brazil or in Russia, a lot of companies, they already fired a lot of people. And if some companies do such simple message like we are here, it's actually, however, the most of global brands, they produce such messages right now. But they show that the business is alive, and actually that you could feel safe basing on such business. So we are here. It's quite a good marketing message right now. And probably you see that a lot of global brands right now they produce the so-called nostalgia videos where they show how they care and that they exist in spite of the fact that pandemic is on the rise. And I would like to say some words about risks of stretching business models, because a lot of discussions, for example, that I had during the last 2 weeks with my clients, they worry about the changing of business models, because a lot of clients, they are afraid of changing something. For example, doing online lessons, because they say to me that some people, they will prefer after coronavirus, they will prefer to stay online instead of going offline and buying products that are more expensive. Yes, that is a real risk, but we should remember that not all people, they will prefer online. However, yes, some companies, they will lose some share of the clients. Also, some owners of the companies, they say to me that the employees, they will become competitors. For example, if you have a legal firm, or if you have communications agency, in a difficult time, some of your colleagues, they will do your own business. Yeah, it's also possible. It's true. But I should say that what I see from my clients, that it's really difficult to deal actually with remote work. There are a lot of webinars how easy it is, how it's easy to use Trello, Slack, different platforms. But in fact, people are very conservative in a way, and a lot of people, they prefer go to the office. So don't be afraid of your employees. they also need to survive. And the third and the most important, probably, that dumping prices, that people, they say like, okay, I will use free of charge right now my services. It means that in future I will not earn so much money as I wanted, and also some my services and products, they will be cheaper. It's also true. This is also a real risk. Okay, Vilius, could you go next, please? I will say also some ideas about the agency market and post-COVID marketing probably could be useful for you. We see that right now a lot of new types of services, they become more popular. Like I already told about social media, like TikTok or YouTube. It's really funny. Like, for example, my oldest, she's 12 years old right now. She came to me and told me, "Mom, could you open me the banking card?" I asked her, "Why to open? You are only 12." And she told me, "Because I saw the advertising in TikTok right now of Sberbank services, and I think it's a good time to try the mobile applications, because we are staying at home and I could be safe doing this online sales, online buying, because you are at home, we are at home, and why not to try?" Also, if you speak about B2B, we see a lot of online events, webinars, online consulting services that B2B companies they produce. Dumping, that already we discussed. Also, we see that a lot of small agencies are killed. For example, here in Russia, we have different agencies media, and for example, last week more than 60 agencies they fired all the teams because they just don't have any clients. And we see a lot of new teams of freelancers that suggest their services on a very small fee. At the same time, if we would like to be more positive, I would like to say some words about boost of marketing. We see a boost of marketing in games, online media. So we see a boost of marketing in online cinema, in online books. That was very untypical to do this advertising before, but right now it's quite normal, it's popular. And also we see a boost of HR marketing, actually, because a lot of companies who thought before only about their sales and about the clients, that's interesting enough that they become to think about finally about the people. And a lot of companies, global brands, they go to us and say to us like, okay, let's do something for our team. Let's do some HR quiz. Let's do some HR game online for our team in order that my team could feel safe and could stay together, because they would like to save the best players. And as I told also already, we see the boost of partners marketing, because your partners, they could help you in this difficult period to sell more. And they could, if you have very good relations with partners, when all this pandemic will be finished, you will improve your relations with partners, and probably you even will win. And if we speak about post-COVID marketing, I could just predict that the boost of contacts will be realized after, because actually what I say to my clients that fitnesses and shops, this is actually not about exercising. You could do exercise whenever you want. Like you could do your fitness exercising even if you are alone at home in the kitchen. But actually people, they go to fitness clubs not because of exercising, but because of socializing. Because we need others in order to feel alive. And also I think that it's a good fact that after post-COVID period, we could see a lot of new types of businesses, employees and standards. Like, for example, in Russia, a lot of clients before they preferred to meet and they preferred to go to the office. And I think that after this COVID pandemic, we will actually meet online more frequently. And also the results, we think that people and clients, they will be more results oriented. Thank you for giving me a word, and thank you for being with me.
Ina, thank you very much. This is very interesting and very impressive to see how different countries actually are reacting really differently. And now I would like to still have my 2 cents on law, actually, since well, I'm a lawyer, and this is something I would like to share. Of course, I'm mindful of time, so I'll try to do it really quickly so that we make sure we have time for our discussion. But some well, basic or general ideas that I won't, of course, talk about technical stuff of law, but I think this crisis, something that it teaches us is that well, law is becoming a strategic decision. Of course, in every crisis, this is so simply because the risk becomes bigger, and the lawyers come in to help and manage that risk and help and manage the problems that arise. And here I have just a list, of the main problems that I see, in this COVID crisis. And of course, for the companies, every one of these risks is really important to be covered in order also to survive. Because if the crisis and the quarantine doesn't kill you, the legal sanctions might. So this is one really important aspect. But not only that, I think why law is becoming more important strategically is because of the choices now are more difficult. I think, and it's generally, I think it's a good thing. I'll explain why. But basically, the choices that you need to make in your strategy are now more. There are more angles. I try to. We try to express it graphically here, but the idea is that you don't only look at compliance, and you must look at compliance. You must make sure you don't put into danger your employees or your clients, and that which could lead to serious sanctions being applied against you. It's not only about enforcement. So it's not only about making sure that your contracts are followed and you collect on your invoices, and this is, of course, what traditionally law is seen as delivering. And restructuring is another thing. If you are in trouble and you need to make a decision to restructure, also this is a strategic decision that's on the table now in the crisis. Government support is an important angle, and an angle that most of the governments, of course, we've heard from Jorge that not all of the governments, but here in Europe and in the US, the governments are really emphasizing the support. They're really emphasizing that we will pull you guys out, we will provide financial stimulus, fiscal stimulus, loans for free, we will divert taxes, and just you have to make sure that you stay alive and you keep the jobs. But also the angle that's, I think, having the biggest weight, and that's why it's low, it's weighting down, is the negotiations. I think this crisis is going to be special because of many reasons, and because of many reasons that have been talked about also today. Is going to be dependent a lot on ability to find negotiated solutions. Because now the choices of your legal remedies, and it's not only now about finding the best legal strategy and doing the best move so that your interests are safeguarded and your counterparty maybe gets the property attached so that you have your financial interests looked after. But the choice is now a reputational choice more than ever. Because of all of the transparency and all of the social sensitivity, now the businesses have to look into reputational impact of the choices that they make in order to preserve their legal position. And while it to enforce may be the best choice financially, in theory, long term, this may have repercussions for business that are going to be really dire. So negotiations aspect, or this I would say community aspect, is going to be very, very important. And this is what we've heard. We're all on this together. This is very important that we keep together, that we go through this as a community. It's important not only in marketing, it's very important in the legal choices as well. So negotiations, just 4 points about negotiations. First, we are much less likely to win in a zero-sum game nowadays. We will need to be collaborative. Even if you're a strong party, if you are seen as aggressive, this will have a price in the future. This could be an opportunity to look for innovative solutions for something that you have not thought about, but maybe your counterparty, stronger or weaker, has thought about, and you can find those solutions together. Internal negotiations are as important. How do you deal with your workforce? How do you make sure the team works? How do you agree with your team to take the hit together? We will see the statistics of how businesses are affected, but some businesses are affected pretty severely. And that means you will need to take the hit together with the employees, and you will need to negotiate that if you want to survive. And of course, number 4, it still counts to prepare for war. So it still counts that in order to be effective in finding a community solution, a solution that's win-win for as many parties as possible, you need to have your weapons ready, because there will be people who will be abusing the situation. And there are already people who are abusing the situation. So we need to have our back watched, in a sense. I'll skip this one because we lack the time. But so what I would like to finish with is what has been repeated time and again, and maybe I'll also give a kind of overview of what we heard just before we move to the discussion. Because what I would like to finish with is that in this crisis and in this current situation, the community, the ecosystem wins, not individuals, in my view, in most countries. Of course, each country is different. There might be different aspects, but this social responsibility is now more important than ever for business, and not only as a kind of slogan and as a kind of responsibility of the marketing department, as it sometimes used to be. Now, our reputation will be remembered, and we saw that in many markets with companies doing too aggressive moves or acting out of fear and hurting the counterparties. That will stay with them, and they are already trying to mitigate the consequences. Well, what we heard from Julien, and again, this is going to be interesting now to go to the discussion. And it was pretty striking. There was we had a really great analysis of the economic outcomes and where we are. And where we are, as Julien said, is similar only to situations of war. So where we are is not usual and a scary place, actually. At the same time, of course, we also heard that there are advice as always, and we need to take care of our liquidity, and we need to make sure of our exposures to US dollars and the interest rates that the cost of money may increase. Nikolas told us on the food sector and of course the different impacts. One part of the Dr. Oetker business going up while others going down. So having to tackle kind of two sides of the crisis at the same time. First of all, trying to make sure that they managed the increased demand, and second, that they managed the decreased demand, and waiting for this to recover. From Jorge, we heard that we have really different situation in different countries, and this is really interesting to look at. And we sometimes here in Europe, at least, we think too much about the Eurozone and the US and the markets that are deemed to be closer. At the same time, in the broader sense, we can see that there are countries which are facing a very specific issues with poverty and also the spread of virus in the poorer areas. And by the way, you know, seasonally, the winter is just coming in Brazil, unlike here in Europe. And Ina had really interesting insights about the changes and you know, things going online, as we all heard. And you know, there's a joke that I heard that the housekeeper is going online and saying, from now on, I'll be sending you an email every morning telling you what you need to put in order in the house. So that's the online service, you know, for everything. But at the same time, this social responsibility that we heard from Ina, you know, this 120 ideas of how an SME could survive, this is just great. And new business models, that are here to stay. So this is a rough summary. I know this is, you know, nothing to actually provide for an accurate, you know, summary of everything that's been said. But we have 17 minutes because we need to finish after 2 hours from the beginning. The time flies. So may I ask, and I know that there may be questions. Oh, by the way, I will show you the result of our of the questions that we asked, just to make sure that we follow what's been. So here you can see that the question, how the results of the sales are going to be affected, a pretty large portion in the 30 and more, and 10 to 30. Good that there are businesses who are seeing growth. This is excellent. And a big diversity. There are some people who think that fourth quarter we're going to be back in business, but end of 21 is also, and even later is also big proportion. So now moving to the discussion, if I can, since we are lacking in time, and if I can ask just one question that's I think interesting for the listeners. Guys, what do you think, if we could go in turns, and what do you think is the biggest lesson that can be taken from the business, for the business from this crisis for the future? No, we are looking beyond COVID. So what do you think is the biggest lesson? So if we could go in the same order, Julien, please. Julien, I think you're muted again.
Sorry, is it better now? Okay. Yeah, well, it's probably way too early to say what's the biggest, what was the biggest lesson. Well, probably one of the biggest will be that, okay, global coordination for this type of crisis is really of the essence to keep things under control, and this is something we lacked tremendously this time, and certainly the decision from the US to stop funding the WHO is not helping, because okay, this is something we could have seen coming earlier. The first cases in China dates back from early November, and we were all surprised early February to see it coming to Italy. So more coordination and more international bodies to follow up on this kind of stuff is really needed. I don't know if you saw this this speech by Bill Gates that he did I think 4 or 5 years ago, simply saying, okay, the biggest risk we have are pandemics now, and okay, this could come again. So clearly that will probably be one of the big lessons. So more international coordination and not less globalization.
Thank you, Julien. But by the way, less globalization, if I may stay on you. There was I mean, and I think it's a pretty, at least for me, it sounds a pretty reasonable opinion that actually one of the outcomes will be less globalization, in the sense that people will be trying to localize the supply chains and become less dependent on China. What do you think about that?
Well, it was already a trend before this crisis. So the trade war between the US and China already led to this kind of behavior. Clearly, with 3D printing, we have some means to do that. But okay, never forget that deglobalization is also what everyone forecasted after 9/11. And okay, the 10 years after, you have twice as much flights going all over the place in the sky. So we have to be cautious when you talk about that. So of course, some underlying trends, especially in reshoring supply chains, will take place. But okay, telling about really less globalization overall in the next 10 years, I don't really believe it. But yeah, some underlying trends certainly will continue.
Okay, thanks, Julien. Nikolas, what do you think? What is the lesson that you've learned?
Well, going in line with Julien, but taking it down to the micro level, I think he was talking about more coordination, expecting that these kind of crises will happen again. And I think the same applies to companies. You have to assume that whether it's financial, brought about by pandemics, or some other shock, crises happen. And if your supply chain and your finances are living on the edge, you will suffer enormously. And conversely, if you manage to be a little bit more conservative and plan for these kind of shocks, you might even find yourself in situations where you can benefit, or at least come out stronger than some of your competitors. So planning for shocks, being a little bit more resilient and flexible, I think will be a lesson for a lot of companies.
Yeah, thank you. And what about Spain again? If I may ask about Spain, Spain is one of the hardest hit countries in Europe, and per capita also in the world. What do you think is the lesson in Spain? I mean, is it, for example, in the Dr. Fauci in the US said that people will stop shaking hands. So will Spanish stop kissing when they meet each other?
I hope not. I think it's one of the wonderful things about this culture is the warmth, and one of the ways to demonstrate that is physical contact. I think it's early to see how people will really change their habits. I honestly don't know. As I say, I think the effect will. I think humans and their habits are strongly formed, and formed by many years and long histories of social interaction. So I don't see an enormous change there. I think it will be more in for example, more flexibility in working from home, in an understanding that there is a private life and a work life, and that you can't isolate one from the other, and to make it possible for people to be more flexible and understand that works. I think that will stay. That will stick.
Thank you, Nikolas. Jorge, so what is your take at the lessons?
Well, I think that first of all, the other day, nowadays everybody is exchanging a lot of communications, and we receive a message from the owner of SeaWorld, and he finalized that small letter with a phrase that the turtle always ends the race, right? So it's a matter of thinking how, in the meantime, we can be resilient to the crisis, and resilient by taking measurements, by acting upon it. This will pass. Yes, it will pass. I don't know how fast. I don't know how quick we can actually cover this. The information that is, as Julien was saying, the information that we have right now, it's changing every single day. I began the presentation with a quote from the owner of Oetker, that is an asset management company, and he's literally, yes, right now we have the information at the present, but all of us, we are ignorant of what is going to be the information in the future. So that leads me actually to the importance of people. Yes, we can be doing home office, be doing social distancing, so forth, but together as people, we need to overcome this, because that's what's going to boost the economy as a whole. That's what's going to be actually taking you up from a transparency perspective, from compliance perspective, from a production perspective, consumption perspective. So I think that's really important. You guys know me, but I'm always more into the side of people and understanding that. And I think that's super critical at this stage. How do we secure, how do we contribute so that the people that are around us have actually the environment, the atmosphere to overcome this crisis and grow stronger?
Thank you, Jorge. Ina, what do you think? What is the lesson?
Yeah, I would like to say that, of course, we should believe that people will be more conscious, but I don't believe in it, actually. I don't think that they will be more conscious after even sitting at home 2 or 3 months. So that's why I think that the most important lesson for probably owners of the companies could be that you should be, as the guys told, that you should be ready for any crisis, but also you should be ready to recreate your business model. Because actually all the examples I gave in the presentation, they were about recreating your business model, not being stuck in what you did before, in order just not to be killed during the crisis.
Yeah, this is really a good point. Recreating a business model. That's the and you gave some really nice examples. But beyond this, I mean, of course, everything is now going online, you know, and even the things that can be moved online and things that cannot really move online. You know, like you were telling about the kindergarten, and you also saw my daughter walk in, and the kindergartens, they don't really help. They create more work for parents when they start doing online. So this is not a business model that will survive. So what do you think? I mean, can you name some that you think are going to be the models of the future?
Yeah, as I told before, like for example, these fitness centers that they do right now, live streaming, they could survive. And actually also probably kindergartens not, but even if you speak about the ESE, or if you speak about some educational services and special courses, like for example, my daughter, she right now is being taught how to draw, how to do it nicely. And she's using their online course from the Japanese artist living in Barcelona. That's incredible. And it's already a reality. And when people tell that, of course, like we would like to be socialized, yes, I agree. But at the same time, for example, I would like to be socialized in the fitness center, yeah, because I like sport and so on. But I don't want to be socialized in the bank. That's why I prefer, for example, mobile application.
Yeah, thank you, Ina. In the last 5 minutes, there's a couple of questions that I think are very interesting. Vygandas and Paulius, in a similar vein, they're asking, was this really predictable? Have you seen the crisis? So the one question is, has the crisis been a surprise to you? And another one is, it looks like there is a crisis every 10 years. 98, 2008, 2020. So next one is 2030. So what do you think about that? Julien, of course, this is your field.
Well, let's hope we'll have to wait for another 10 years before seeing the next one. But I mean, they are very different in nature. Huh? So last time was a financial shock. This time we have both a demand and supply shock that may transform into a financial shock if we don't pay enough attention to it. So the crisis sources are very different. Now, of course, okay, this is the kind of one-time event that is really disruptive, and of course could not be expected. Anyone that was expecting that clearly should have spoken much earlier, and we did not we did not hear lots of them. But as I said before, clearly we could have seen that coming weeks earlier. This would have saved lives, especially the winter holidays in Western Europe were a trigger for contagion. And okay, lockdown measures should have been taken right after those and not 2 weeks after, like it was the case in most countries. We would have saved lives, that's for sure. But no, in terms of seeing that coming, I mean, unfortunately it's impossible, and it's the same for the next epidemic, because there will be a next one.
Well, the epidemics seem to be once over 100 years, yeah? If we say this is similar to Spanish flu. So
the problem is that 100 or 200 years ago, the epidemics were taking months, if not years, to spread, and now, of course, it's really a matter of weeks. And what is striking, because we were talking about information, but what is striking in this crisis is our inability to measure what is actually happening, because be it in terms of activity, it's very hard to measure in sectors right now what is actually happening. Even in terms of number of COVID cases, we have completely different measures of that. Countries are counting some types of patients, or not. Okay, you have some guesses about what's happening, but actually, okay, nobody really knows. We just see a trend. That's all.
Thank you, guys. Would anyone like to say something more on this? Because we have the last minute.
Just to challenge one point quickly. I think Julien is completely right that evidently we would have saved lives had someone reacted sooner to this. But on the other hand, I mean, I imagine the interior or health minister of Germany or Spain or Italy sitting in their cabinet 2 months ago and suggesting that they shut down sort of half the economy with, I don't know, 1 or 2 cases here and there. And you could imagine the response of the finance and economic ministers to that thing. I think I have enormous respect for how incredibly difficult it is. And I remember how much criticism there was, at least in Germany, to when early decisions to stop football matches and so on and so forth. I think it is, and this is actually why I think these kind of thing will happen again. And for the reasons you just mentioned, Julien, probably unfortunately before 100 years are through. It is so difficult to respond with all the interconnections and complexity we have today, to respond quickly. The benefit is, of course, that also we can share information. We can learn from this crisis. We can prepare ourselves, going back to Bill Gates's video from 4 or 5 years ago, and perhaps respond quicker when it happens. So let's hope for that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Nikolas hit the bullseye here. Even now there are discussions whether full shutdown is the right reaction, and we all know that in Sweden they didn't elect to do full shutdown, and we are still waiting to see what's going to happen. So it's these are such difficult decisions. Anyway, thank you very, very much. I think this was really super interesting. I think your insights were really, really helpful. I'm sure the audience also appreciates that. And thank you very, very much for those who joined us to listen. We will be posting online the recording of this webinar. So please, if you had to go or would like to look at it again, that will be fully available. And so now, guys, it was an honor. Really, also super nice to catch up again. And well, I hope we have something similar again on an occasion. That was really enjoyable. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Vilius.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vilius.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Stay healthy.
Yeah.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.